All right, just want to do a quick little book review. This one is The Swerve by Stephen Greenblatt. Um, so I found this book because I was researching books by Epicurus or books about Epicurus and his philosophy. And this one came up about the poem called On the Nature of Things by Lucretius, written in, I want to say like 50 BC or BCE. And it is heavily influenced by Epicurean philosophy. Um, Epicurus is one of my favorite philosophers, namely because he kind of embodied a lot of what my original thoughts about reality were when I was kind of like a teenager. And I kind of came up with my own philosophy in a sense. And then when I started researching philosophers who have had ideas in history, he kind of resonated with me. So I've always kind of had a place in my heart, a sentimental place in my heart for Epicurus. Namely, well, not, yes. So probably the main thing is what would be called the pleasure principle. I remember when I was like, oh geez, I was in like the first grade or kindergarten, and I just remember I was with my mom getting picked up from school from like, yeah, kindergarten or whatever, or first grade. And I remember thinking, why does anybody do anything? And at that point, I reasoned that everybody does it for like a selfish uh, reason. Like, why would anybody do anything basically? They would do it. The way I thought of it back then would be like a warm feeling in their stomach. And I was like I thought everything was like a selfish act just for pleasure, basically. Like, even if somebody chose to walk an old lady across the street, I remember specifically thinking that. I said they only do it so that they feel good, you know? I kind of didn't believe in true, what's the word? Kindness. Begins with an A. Oh God, if I think too hard about it, I won't remember it. Yeah. Uh, yeah, and so I basically thought everything was a selfish act. I kind of still think there's a possibility that that's still the way things are. I mean, I haven't totally gone against that. I've kind of give credence to some other views as well, but not enough credence to any one view to totally dispel all the others. So um, that, and then also when I was about maybe when I was 18 or 19, I was smoking a joint with a buddy of mine, and I had just a huge breakthrough about free will. I just realized that, the world is made up of basically atoms and void, which is heavily discussed in Lucretius's poem and Epicurus's philosophy. And I reasoned that the world is predetermined, basically, not in like a way like from God or anything. In fact, I was an atheist all through my teenage years, and I reason there's no such thing as free will. Everything is just cause and effect. Everything is caused by its prior thing. Um, and then I got into thinking, the future could theoretically be predicted, and we can even discover exactly what happened in the past if we had like a supercomputer. And then I started getting into these weird thought experiments, which I still want to delve into deeper. But these are some of the things that have made me closely connected with Epicurus. So I was really excited to read this book. And it partially lived up and exceeded my expectations, and partially fell very short, because about half of the book is kind of just a history about this Italian man, Poggio Bracconili or something like that, who lived in the 15th or 14th century, and about how he rediscovered On the Nature of Things, which is Lucretius's poem, an epic poem. And I think a little bit too much went into the history of this Italian man, although his discovery was monumental. It kind of shaped the Renaissance in a huge way. It influenced so many minds, so many artists and scientists. I think specifically it kind of influenced Bruno, who was famously, um, I think he was burned at the stake in Rome, and then he went on to influence Copernicus, and then Galileo, and then you've basically are getting close to the Enlightenment. So the rediscovery of Lucretius's and Epicurus's philosophy heavily, I think, influenced the modern world. And in fact, it even says that on the cover, the Swerve, how the world became modern, because basically, when the Roman Empire became Christian, Epicureanism, Epicureanism, um, it totally got banished, basically, for about 1,000 years. So, um, this was a really cool book. I would probably go back to it and for certain chapters. Let's see which. So chapter 8 was the one that I actually enjoyed the most, and that one was because it literally just was an overview of Lucretius's poem. Obviously, you're not getting the beauty of reading the actual poetry, but the main ideas in it. And I'll just quickly go through them. Everything is made of invisible particles, so that's atomism. Originally, Democritus, um, him, and then another philosopher that I can't remember the name of. But yeah, he was pre-Socratic, so before Socrates, very, very long time ago, maybe 3,000 years or so ago. And basically, some of the first philosophers ever, um, atomism, and Epicurus was an atomist also. He was heavily influenced by Democritus. The second, the elementary particles of matter, the seeds of things are eternal. So that's kind of like the second or third law of thermodynamics, which is like the conservation of mass in a sense. The elementary particles are infinite in number but limited in size and shape. I don't really have much to say about that. All particles are in motion in an infinite void. Everything comes into being as a result of a swerve. This is where I kind of don't agree with the philosophy, or I find myself having a tough time wrapping my head around it. So there's this thing called the swerve, basically, title of the book. And basically what it means is you have atoms in the void, and that just basically can describe the universe. You can almost think of it as like a giant 3D pool table. Like one atom gets hit into motion, it hits another one, which hits another one, which hits another one, and the whole world is deterministic, and that's just how it is. But this idea called the swerve basically says that like what will happen is you have one you have one atom going into a direction, it will just randomly swerve. And that describes free will and basically describes how anything happens in the first place, because originally the idea from Epicurus was all the atoms were just falling. And so really you didn't have any universe ever, because the atoms don't connect with each other to create matter, to create objects. So one has to swerve, another one will swerve, and they'll start binding together, hitting off each other. But if they never swerve, they never come into contact with one another. So I find this all a little bit just, if I'm in my denying of free will mode, I guess we'll call it, I don't really give credence to randomness. It just doesn't make sense. It's basically just another way of saying the supernatural or a miracle. And I don't know if I necessarily believe in free will, but that's a whole thing that I probably can't get into right now, maybe at another time. Okay, so nature ceaselessly experiments. That's really interesting, because that kind of describes evolution in a way, and they go into that about how well, I won't go. I'll kind of skip over that part. The universe was not created for or about humans. This was one of the main things I think that the church, the Catholic Church, didn't like, Christianity didn't like, and that's kind of part of the reason why Epicureanism got banished, along with the pleasure principle. That's probably one of the biggest ones. yeah, and not being afraid of death, basically. So that will come into it. Humans are not unique. Human society began not in a golden age of tranquility and plenty, but in a primitive battle for survival. So that kind of um, denies the Garden of Eden. In the fall, the soul dies. There is no afterlife. Death is nothing to us. So these are big ones that obviously totally goes against Christianity. If you can free a man from fearing death, the church really doesn't have much sway in a way over mankind. um, and if we're not going to feel anything when we die, there's really nothing to fear from it. That's a whole subject that I could really delve into. Um, but it's attractive and it's liberating to believe that. So that's something enticing about Epicureanism or Lucretianism. I do notice that this book focuses a little bit more on Lucretius than on Epicurus himself, which that's okay. I actually didn't know that much about Lucretius, so but I was looking for a little bit more about Epicurus. Religions are invariably cruel, probably because they're fear based. I think that's what it goes into. The highest goal of human life is the enhancement of pleasure and the reduction of pain. So, kind of, that's the pleasure principle, but it's not like a gluttonous, hedonistic, want of pleasure because that's just not prudent. If you want to maximize pleasure over your lifetime, you kind of have to plan for the future in a smart way. The greatest obstacle to pleasure is not pain, it is delusion. So that's kind of like a Buddhist thing there. Realizing the desire is the cause of suffering, and that um, sometimes people are desiring superficial or just ridiculous things. And the fact that these desires are not satiated causes suffering. But if you rationalize it, maybe they shouldn't be desires in the first place. What should we really desire? And if we can achieve those things, we can minimize pain in our lives. And what else do we have here? Understanding the nature of things generates deep wonder. That's kind of like I imagine something that Richard Dawkins might say. Just the beauty of the way the world is, I guess, understanding it in a non supernatural way. Overall, I really did enjoy this book, and I would highly recommend it to basically anybody who is kind of interested in history, the Renaissance, because I really didn't have a firm understanding of kind of how the Renaissance happened and what it meant and really what it was. And it's not really like this goes into the Renaissance, but it kind of does describe how it percolated. Basically, Petrarch kind of started this whole movement of rediscovering all these ancient books, and then this man Poggio and some of his humanist, that's what they're called, the humanities. That's where I think the subject, the humanities, comes from, is studying the history of literature, classic texts. So they, were book hunters. They went into monasteries and kind of rebirthed all these books into society, and then they went on to influence everybody. Isaac Newton was heavily influenced by these ideas, like a materialistic world. Many scientists since on the nature of things was released heavily influenced the world. So kind of rambling, so I'll cut it short anyway. It's a great book.